A week ago, Friday night, it was about 45 minutes before Shabbat services were about to begin, and I found myself in a bike store trying to buy a bicycle. And the question is, why? A little bit of a story, so sit tight. I was in St. Louis taking Ari, my middle child, to college. And I had a really special opportunity for me as a rabbi to spend Shabbat with him. Ari realized suddenly on that afternoon that he really wanted a bicycle. We hadn't brought his from out here because, it costs more than the actual bicycle. So we walked by a student-run business that was renting bicycles for the year, $279 for a mediocre bike. I appreciated these kids' entrepreneurial spirit, but Ari and I looked at each other and said, no. So we got on our phones, started Googling bike stores and called them up. And one was very nice. They said, we got a new bike. You can take it right now. We've got nice ones, $1,500 to $10,000. That wasn't going to happen. So we saw there was a bike store nearby, and we drove right over there. And again, they showed us new bikes. I think we got down to like $500 for a decent bike. And then we asked, are there any used bikes maybe? And they took us and showed us 5 bicycles that looked like they had been in some kind of major conflict. And they clearly weren't going to work out. So I kind of asked the clerk, do you have anything else? Maybe something like in the back of the store? His eyes widened. He said, well, there is this one bicycle. I've taken it all apart, but I'll show it to you. I don't think you're interested. We go back and we see a bicycle. It's missing its crankset. It has no pedals. It's a little bit of a mess. But I look closely, and it's a Trek 1000, which is the bicycle that I raced on in college. And it was a nice frame. It had new, non-racing, but decent tires. The clerk said, I'm putting it back together, which was good because otherwise it wasn't gonna get very far. I asked him, how much do you want for it? He said, give me $100. Ari and I looked at each other. We'll take it. It was one of those moments where you feel kind of like you won the lottery. And suddenly some of the stress of moving into school lifted, and we entered Shabbat on a little bit of a high. Now, underneath this lucky find, what we call in Yiddish a metzia, was the simple fact that transitions are hard. Behind this somewhat frantic search just minutes before Shabbos was the fact that I wasn't exactly sure what we needed or how I could help my son at this moment. Looking back now, I realized that I was feeling a lot. Ari was going to college. I was going to miss him. Moving him into the dorm, I was pretty anxious for him. Would he find friends? What were his roommates like? What classes should he take? And as he's on this journey to a new phase, I, as his Abba, as his dad, was also on a journey. Taking a child to school is a liminal moment, just like starting a new job, retiring, moving, celebrating a bar mitzvah. You're leaving one place and entering another, but you're actually in that in-between space, not entirely in either. As Ashi taught us earlier this morning, the thread that's underlying all of the numerous mitzvot, the commandments in this week's parasha, is really how to be a good person, how to be a mensch. And what I realized is that underneath all of these commandments, there are some other more subtle teachings. And I want to share one of those with you. In several places in the parasha, we find the word baderech, on the journey, on the way. In fact, it's the most common word that's utilized in this morning's Torah reading. We also find this theme of going on a journey right from the beginning. Teitzei melchama, when you go out into a war, when you go out into this dangerous situation. Now, of course, a journey into a war is a serious business, a terrible business, as we see right now every day in Ukraine. The reading then continues with all kinds of journeys. How should we act when we are baderech, on the way? For example, the Torah portion says, quote, because they did not greet you with bread and with water, baderech. The Torah is reminding us of the nations of Ammon and Moab, and it says they didn't take care of you when you were on the derech, when you were in the wilderness, when you were vulnerable. Baderech is also utilized in connection to Miriam. The Torah reminds us of that moment when Miriam and Moses are not getting along. Baderech. At the end of the reading, we find Baderech twice in relationship to the Amalekites. It says, Zachoret asher asalecha Amalek. Remember what the Amalekites did to you, Baderech, when they surprised you, when they attacked from the rear, attacking those who were most vulnerable again. And we also find it with animals. If you see someone's donkey or ox that has fallen down on the road, baderech, on the journey, you must help lift up that animal. Ibn Ezra, the great Spanish commentator, points out that aiding one person in need or their animal, even if it's only the animal, that's immediately followed by the mitzvah of shiluach hakein, the mitzvah of sending away the mother bird, as Ashi spoke about before taking its eggs. Where, of course, does all this happen? When you are going out on the way, when you are journeying. That's where you should take a little bit of extra care to think about how you are walking, how you are going. In this case, looking out for the animals around you. So what's a deeper teaching here? We're being invited to think about when we are on journeys, when we are in transition, and to think about that it's not necessarily the destination, which we often lock in on, but it's actually the derech itself. It is actually the walking in that moment. When you're on a journey, notice where you are. Notice the animals that you encounter. Notice the other people, how they treat us, how you should treat them. In these liminal, sometimes dangerous, unclear places, we need the most care. Perhaps we need the most mitzvot and commandments to help us. These are the most critical and complicated places in our lives. When you are there, baderech, pay attention. Now, this is, of course, a major theme in the Torah, as almost all of our first and earliest spiritual ancestors were shepherds. They paid attention to the details, like where their animals were. They paid attention to how they were doing. What about the weather? What about predators? And they were also aware, because they were always on some level on the way, the beauty and awe of nature all around us. Often we don't see it. Often, I'll speak for myself, we don't really stop and become aware of where we are, the others who are with us, all those around us. We're more focused on the destination than on the derech. But it's in that awareness that is the key to being a moral person. We need to know where we are, what we are doing, especially baderech, and then perhaps we can live up to the mitzvot in this week's Torah reading. A couple of days later, the end of my time, and it was my time to give that final goodbye to Ari. We went for a long walk in the park next door called Forest Park. a huge, beautiful space. It includes an art museum, a zoo, golf course. Most excitedly for Ari, it has a running and cycling track that encircles the park. As we walked, we suddenly noticed on the side a waterfall. We stopped to look at it, and there was a little staircase going up. We took the staircase up and found a path into the woods. And suddenly we see this bird with this amazing wingspan fly right by onto a tree branch, maybe 20 feet away. We thought it was a hawk. We snuck up a little bit closer and we saw that it was an owl spinning its head around, watching us. One of those wow moments, a real find in the forest, baderech. We smiled and fully took in that moment. It opened us up to some of those deeper feelings, both of sadness and excitement, the anxiety and the hope that we were both feeling as we said goodbye. When we go out, Teitzei, let us focus not only on where the derech is taking us, but on the journey itself. May our lives be filled with drachim, paths of peace, roads of goodness, and journeys of awareness. Shabbat Shalom.